before I got into real estate, I didn't tell anybody until after I closed. You want to know why? Because everybody would have said, why are you doing this? Everyone would have said all of those things because no one had ever done it.
In my 30s, I remember buying an Infiniti G35, like in 2007, dude. I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a baller driving an Infiniti. Back then the payment was like $400. And in 2007, that like, a $700 payment with inflation and stuff. And you don't think about it, but like they're such bad moves. And I always tell my kids, like I have a daughter who's in college right now. And I always tell her like, don't buy dumb shit.
People need to be careful who they're taking advice from. You're taking information from somebody who has no experience doing what it is you're trying to do. Oh, it's not a good idea. What is that based off of?
Have you navigated any of these challenges as a Black investor ever? Have you ever thought about anything like that? What's your thoughts on real estate with the Trump campaign and versus a Harris campaign?
Well, I'm ready for it to be over.
Welcome to the JV Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Vasquez.
What is up, my friends? Welcome back to another episode of the JV Pod. Appreciate you guys for being here. Today's episode is going to be fantastic. You're actually going to love it. My buddy Sam heard on Bigger Pockets probably about a year ago. He talks a lot about diversity in real estate. Sam is a Black man and I'm obviously a Hispanic man. And, there's not a whole lot of people that are Black and brown that invest in real estate. In fact, we talk about some of the figures, how many people actually invest in real estate that are Black or brown folks. And we talk about some of the disparities that come along with that investing. And a lot of it comes from just things that we've learned as we're younger. And I'd really love to see more Hispanic and Black investors come into this space. And I do believe right now there's a shift in the ideology of Black and brown folks to get involved in real estate, get involved in entrepreneurship. And we really discuss a lot of those topics today in detail on, the ways that we were raised and different ideas that come along and how, we have the ability now to look at other people in the space that look just like us and be able to connect with them through Instagram or to be able to send a note and get these connections with these other people. And I think it's so important to make sure to do that. I know myself as a Hispanic investor, when I started investing in real estate, I looked around and I didn't really find too many people out there that looked just like me. And for those of you that are not Hispanic or Black, it's really, really important for a Hispanic or a Black person or anybody of a different ethnic group to find other people like themselves that look like them investing in real estate. I mean, for me, it was a massive, big thing because I didn't see many people like me that were investing. So today's episode happens to talk a lot about that. So check it out. I think it'll be a inspirational, thoughtful. This conversation with Sam was really good. You guys are going to love this. So stay tuned. It is coming right up. And if you could do me a huge, huge favor, I would appreciate you so freaking much. And that is going and liking this page, subscribing to this page. And also if you could do me the biggest solid on the planet, and that would be leaving me a review, because that allows me to get some really fantastic guests. And that allows me to get to more people just like you, which I would love to do. So let's jump into this with Sam. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the JV Pod. I'm super pumped because we have a gentleman named Sam. I'm gonna butcher your last name. I've never actually seen this last name before, Sam. So I need your help on this, man. I'm gonna try this for a minute, all right? And I haven't checked with you ahead of time. Tell me if I'm wrong. Dolciné.
Close. Dolciné.
Dolciné. Dang, man. Where's that last name from?
My parents are both from Haiti, so it's probably a French name.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. You got a little like what is that thing called on the end of the E right there? I don't even know what that's called.
Someone mentioned it this morning. It's like I don't know why it's escaping me. There's a name for it. I just forgot.
Yeah. I don't know what they are either. But anyway, when you guys check out this podcast, look at Sam's last name. It's got the little, I usually see that with Hispanic last names, man.
Like a little accent marker or whatever it's called.
Yeah. A little accent marker or something like that. Yeah. But, the reason why I wanted to have you on, I actually saw you on Bigger Pockets probably like, was that a year and a half ago, dude? Somewhere right around there?
Yeah. Might have been like, you know what? It might have been right about a year ago, maybe.
A year ago?
Yeah. Right about a year ago, I think.
You were on Bigger Pockets, and I was immediately drawn to you. First off, you're a Black man on Bigger Pockets. And, I feel like a lot of times, a lot of these real estate shows don't necessarily have diversity when it comes to shows, but not when it comes to, having guests and things of that nature. And I'm not saying that they don't, because they do. They have a couple staple pieces like Henry and some other folks that are on that, Tony Robinson, and they're regulars on the show. But I feel like, first off, there's not a whole lot of Hispanics and Black folks that are in real estate. And I just get extremely excited when I see folks that are, getting on these, and I'm going to call it bigger stage because, and we'll talk about this for you, but Bigger Pockets changed my life in a lot of ways. So I'm not sitting here like, bashing Bigger Pockets at all. I just feel like there's just a lack of diversity when it comes to that. And I'm also, and we'll talk about this here in a minute, but I just get excited when I see folks of color on these stages like this, because those stages can change your life. Like I'll talk about this for myself real quick, Sam, and then we can go into your topics. But I was able to get on Bigger Pockets back in 2023, I think, beginning of 2023. And that completely changed my life. I ended up being friends with Rob Abasolo, who's no longer on the show anymore. He's one of the Hispanic folks that was on Bigger Pockets on the main channel. And he happened to be like, I think you'd be really great on the show. We want to have you on. And Sam, that show right there went viral. I think it has to this day, last time I looked, it was like 200 or 330,000 views online.
Wow.
And to have that many views, it's first off, it's not a lot of views. Second off, I'm giving myself a little bit of credit by saying it was a lot of views, but I think what was cool is that gave me a platform now to continue to build, the business that I'm doing. It gives you credibility to a certain degree, but it also brings recognition from people that don't necessarily know you. And I can't tell you how many messages I got from people that were like, "Hey man, it's really awesome to see a Hispanic dude on this platform." I feel like, there was a lot of exclusion when it comes to seeing people like you or me. And I relate to people instantly based off of color. And I'm not saying this in a way of I'm excluding everybody else from that, but it's a different sense when you see somebody of your ethnicity who's on a stage like that, because it's not common, especially in real estate. And I wish I had those figures in front of me. In fact, you and I talked about this a while back. We actually talked about getting on a podcast together and talking about these things, but I should pull the information up. But it was out of all investors, Black and minority investors were literally I think it was 7%. I'll look it up. And the internet can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I'll look it up here in a minute. But out of every investor, 7%, man, which is wild. But I know there's a lot to unpack, but let's talk about you being on Bigger Pockets real quick, and we'll jump into some of this other stuff. What did that change your life in any way at all?
Yeah, so it was a great opportunity and great experience. And shout out to Ashley and Tony on the Real Estate Rookie podcast. It was a great experience. And, I got to say, when I was getting started in real estate, I didn't know anything. And I did look to Bigger Pockets a lot. And, I met really cool people who helped me to this day through that platform. So that platform definitely did help me a lot starting out. And being on the show was pretty surreal, to be honest. I didn't think it would be something that would happen. And I think I just was like, you know what, let me just throw in an application. And I think I knew one of the guys who did the social media, because I did a takeover maybe 2 years before or something like that, or 3 years before. I did a takeover. So I'm like, you know what, let me reach out to this dude. Let me see if he thinks I could be good on the show. And he's like, yeah, you know what, I'll put a word in, fill out the application, no promises, but we'll see what happens. And thankfully it worked out, but it was great. It was great. A lot of comments. Sometimes I go back and see if there's new comments and reply to them on YouTube. But yeah, similarly, I got messages afterwards and just people showing love and asking questions and things like that. So, it definitely was impactful. And I'm so thankful and appreciative that I had an opportunity to get on. It was a great interview, and it was a great moment, man.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, man. I think it's, when I first started investing, I went to Bigger Pockets and listened to, Brandon Turner and all these folks on there. And even going back and looking at that, that was the first introduction I had to real estate, was being on Bigger Pockets or not being on Bigger Pockets, but, listening to the show. Back in 2015, there wasn't really any podcasts that were out that were specific to investing. And it was cool to hear, regular everyday folks on the show just talking about the things and the strategies that they did to get where they're at. And I guess you don't really picture yourself on a show like that. Did you ever think, you just said a second ago, you didn't really think about it, right? You didn't really think about being on that show ever?
No, I didn't think I would. So that made it even more special.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah, I'm totally with you. The crazy thing about me is I thought about being on that show. I was like, I want to get on that show someday, and I believe that I'm going to get on there and whatever. I feel like that's people need to connect somehow, or I want to make sure that I got out there and represented our community in a way, and got on a show like that. So it's really cool to get on the show. It really, really is. But leading to that, what got you involved in real estate? And I'm going to talk about a couple other things, but let's dive into that. How did you actually get into real estate?
Yeah. So my first interest in real estate, I had thought about it passively, but I thought I had to be rich. So I was like, I had this whole plan. I'm gonna go to grad school. I'm gonna get this big corporate job. I'm gonna live in a low cost of living area, and then I'll be able to invest in real estate. However, here's what happened. So about 6 years ago, I was at work. I was working at a school, wasn't making much money. And I don't know why I decided to look at my retirement account, whatever was in there. And then they said, press this and we'll show you what we think you'll have at retirement. So 67 and a half, whatever it is these days. And they said, all right, now put how much you want to live off of. So I put what I thought was a fairly modest number. And long story short, the money was going to run out in like less than 10 years. So I said, okay, well, clearly I'm not making enough money. I need to figure out a way to make more money outside of my job. I had heard about real estate. I heard people say you can make money. I didn't know what that meant, what that looked like. And so here in LA, I reached out to the person I knew who did real estate stuff. He said, fill out this information. Let's look at your finances. He said, look, your debt to income ratio is too high. You don't make enough money. Maybe you can get a condo, no promises. And I'm like, all right, that doesn't really help me. So I just started doing research and I discovered people investing out of state, which I didn't even know you could do because I never knew anybody who did that. And that's kind of what got me started. And fast forward 12 months later, I was able to buy that first out of state property. But it all started because I realized my retirement at that rate was not going to be enough to take care of me and whoever else I need to take care of. And so it just was with a long-term goal of, all right, through real estate, I can build cash flow over time so that when I'm older, I have multiple sources of income outside of whatever retirement to take care of me and my family.
Yeah. I think that's how it all starts too. We all think we need to have a lot of money, but that is a stomach punch to the gut when you have a lender just be like, man, you don't make enough, or, you know, you're just not in that spot yet, or you got too much debt, you know, when you don't think about those cars that you buy. And like, I remember I was that way, man. I would like in my 20s and even in my 30s, I would buy like, I remember buying an Infiniti G35, like in 2007, dude. I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a baller driving a Infiniti, you know, and that back then the payment was like $400. And in 2007, that's like, you know, a $700 payment now with inflation and stuff. And you don't think about it, but like, yeah, dude, it's just such a bad, there's such bad moves. And I always tell my kids, like I have a daughter who's in college right now. And I always tell her like, don't buy dumb shit, because it'll catch up to you later. And thankfully she doesn't. She thinks about stuff, but I also like say, don't save. Like you got to put money to investments and things of that nature. But did your family talk to you about investing? Was that ever like a common conversation in your household? What was that like?
Not at all. The extent of it was save your money. But, you know, we grew up fine. Like we had what we needed. We didn't have everything, but we had what we needed. We were fine. But my parents didn't have financial literacy. They don't have financial literacy and investing and things like that. It was more so like save your money, go to college, get a good job, and take care of yourself and your family. So what I'm doing now is like mind blowing to them. They're so proud and they're so impressed because this is stuff that they weren't even aware of that was possible. So, you know, it wasn't their fault. They just didn't know. They didn't have the information and the knowledge to give me. They're just working to provide for my sisters and I, and they did the best they could. They just didn't have that financial piece to be able to help us with.
Yeah. Do you feel like, you know, most people have access to think like that, like most families? And this is me just thinking out loud. Like I'm talking about my, you know, growing up Hispanic, you know, my household was, my parents did own properties. My mom came over from Mexico. My dad lived in the States. They met each other. My dad went to college and actually ended up being a biology major. My mom obviously came from Mexico and got her citizenship here and all that stuff. But even then, like my dad never really talked about money, even though he's college educated. And I think a lot of that goes back to, you know, his family and the way that they looked at money. In fact, my family, dude, we were raised in a way that if people had money or were rich, they were evil. Like that's what my brain was automatically associating having money with it. Because my parents would say, like, most people that make money are evil and they're doing something wrong or it's unethical and yada, yada, yada. So, like, I grew up with that mentality of, like, you know, you see somebody pull up in a sweet-ass car and you're just like, what are these motherfuckers doing? Like, what are they stealing? Or what are they doing? Or who are they ripping off? You know, like, I had that mentality until I met somebody that allowed me to start to think differently. In fact, I actually started listening to a guy named Les Brown. I'm sure you know who Les Brown is, right?
Yes, I've heard of him.
If you guys haven't heard of Les Brown, go check him out. He started to open my eyes about, he's basically the Myron Golden of the 90s and early 2000s. If you know, do you know who Myron Golden is, Sam?
Yes, I've heard of him.
Okay, cool. Yeah, he was a preacher turned kind of motivational speaker in the 90s and 2000s. He's still around now. But he was really influential in having me start to think a different way, which led me down the line of like going to bigger pockets, trying to understand real estate. And I didn't have that from my household, you know, growing up. And I think some of the questions that I have for you are like, do you feel like most people have that ability to pick up, information like, real estate or stocks or bonds, or do you feel like people need to be kind of taught that in a way from like early childhood, or do you feel like maybe they learn that later on? What's your thoughts on that?
In my opinion, the best way is to learn from childhood, because when I looked at my peers and those around me, especially as I went to college and you're in the workforce and all this stuff, you realize how far ahead certain people are in their thinking, right? For example, I remember working at a summer camp when I was in college, and I was hard headed. I was like 19. I think I just finished
Yeah.
my freshman year. I was working at a summer camp. One of the kids' fathers was telling us to start investing in stocks. He gave us like a guide and a little paper. I don't even know what I did with it, but he was like trying to get us to
Yeah.
like paper trade and paper invest and just practice and get exposure to the market. And this kid is probably like 7 years old. So if he's telling us that as young adults, don't you think his kid is going to be much further ahead if his dad is teaching him that at that age, right? This was like 10 years ago. So I can
Sam, you
imagine
remember
that
that
kid.
kid's name? Let's look him up right now. Let's see what he's doing.
I really wish I remembered his name. I really wish I remembered his name, but I'm sure he's doing fantastic. And
Yeah.
so, it can only benefit you if you learn it earlier and earlier, right? Whereas you learn it as an adult, now you're playing catch up with everybody who had the information, who understood business, who understood finance, investing, stocks and real estate and all that stuff. There's a lot less catching up to do if a kid is exposed to it at a young age. So, I mean, we have the information now, thankfully. So the next generation, it'll be a lot easier for them because there's more access to information and we also know more, right? That's how it's supposed to be. But yeah, it can only benefit someone from learning that from a young age.
Yeah, I was actually reading an article on like kind of the topic that you're talking about right now, where it's like poor people, like, or poor kids, if they had the ability to be around rich kids' parents for just a minute, their financial literacy improved by like $30,000 or $40,000, like as they started to adult. And that was like, because they're consuming this different information. What I think, and I'll go back and talk about this a little bit more, but I just looked it up right now. Studies show that children who grow up in affluent areas, even if they come from low income households, can tend to earn up to 30% more than their lifetime peers from poorer neighborhoods. Which obviously right there, that tells you like, if you're around these folks, or like, say your school district is right on the edge of going to a different school and you're going to that school where there's, those kids are making more money, you're going to make 30% more than the other people that happen to go to the other, other school. That might not have, the kids parents that are making a little bit more money and things of that nature. So yeah, I think it's really important. And I think the cool thing about what you're doing too, is you're changing, your kids' future. I don't think you don't have kids right now, right, Sam?
Not yet.
Not yet. But when you do, like you're changing the cycle of what your parents have taught you. And
Yep.
you start to see that generational change and that shift over time. And I think that's such an empowering thing, because you're now giving your kids skills that are going to be, you're going to be able to, create a lifetime of different possibilities for them just based off the information that you know now. And I think that's such a crazy thing to think about. Like, it's just a shift in mindset that allows you to literally change an entire generation and the generations to come, because now they're absorbing new information that they've never had before.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, man. It's a beautiful thing. And I like what you mentioned about just, the outcome of kids who are around those who are more affluent and wealthy. It's funny. I was listening to How I Built This podcast, and they were talking to the founder of, I think it was Olipop, and he grew up poor in a very nice area, but he said, it allowed him to think, it allowed him to be exposed to a lot of stuff. He had a terrible childhood, but growing up where he grew up in many ways impacted and helped him get to where he is now. Right. So I think getting in new environments and getting kids exposed to different things, like regardless of where they end up living, they don't choose where they live. It can go a long way. It can really go a long way.
Yeah. And that really, for me, I don't know how you were when you were a kid, but I was a freaking maniac, dude. I was like smoking weed and like skateboarding and hanging out with these kids that were just like not, troublemakers. And, I was always the kid that was, not wild and crazy, but I was like, I had my head on straight. I wasn't the guy that was like getting drunk and falling over and being all crazy. I was the guy. In fact, I remember this. I remember when I was a kid, I dropped my friend off in the morning. I was probably like 17, maybe 18. I don't know. We went out and had a couple beers. He ended up getting wasted. Like, he fell asleep. We put grapes in his ears and stuff, and a cardboard box of Bud Light on his head. And he woke up in the morning. Still had that on. He went home hungover. And I remember dropping him off, and his dad comes out. Like, his dad was waiting for him to come home, dude. Like,
Wow.
the second that I pulled up out front, his dad walked outside. And like he could, you know, how when somebody drinks too much, like you could smell it on the next day, like you can actually smell that the alcohol that's like absorbed in their skin. And he goes up to Mike, and his name was Mike, and he's like, you know, you were hungover, yes, like you're hungover right now. You go get the lawnmower. You're gonna mow the lawn right now. And he looked over at me and he's like, I bet you Jesse doesn't drink like this, didn't get hungover last night, is going to be able to go home and acted normal last night. And although he was around all these people doing these crazy things, he still had a level head. And like, that was me at 17. Like this kid's parent was able to pick that up in me, that I could still be around people doing crazy stuff, but not like, you know, in fact, I used to like, you know, people would take shots. I was like one of those guys that would like throw the shot behind my back. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like in a movie, I'd be like, everybody would be taking shots and I like throw it behind my back, because I didn't want to be out of control. Like I didn't want to have that feeling of, you know, being out of control. And I'm not saying that in a good way. I'm saying that as in like, yes, I was able to kind of be around the fire and not get burned. And ultimately, I think those were positive things. But man, I wish I had people that were like back then at that age, because I was influenced by the people that were around me to a certain degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had people that were, you know, friends or mentors, or my parents that were like, you know, thinking more of like, you know, you got to start thinking about investing. You got to start thinking about these things, or, you know, go to this kind of camp or whatnot. And I feel like maybe I needed to have that in a weird way, Sam, where I needed to like kind of learn these things and have it come to fruition on its own. But I do always think about like, what would be different if I was able to, you know, start listening to podcasts when I was, you know, they didn't have podcasts, but I'm thinking about kids that grew up now. Like we have access to so much good information and it's free. It's literally like we can listen to, just like what you said, Olipop, we can literally listen to somebody who's made millions of dollars or created this awesome idea on our freaking phones, these tiny computers in our pockets with earbuds that are connected without a cord. Like how amazing, right? Like we're living in great times.
Absolutely. It's the best. It's like some of the best times to live in, just because of, like you said, how much is accessible within seconds of information we want to know about. So it's amazing. It's an amazing time to be in, man.
Yeah. Not only that, but like, you know, I think the quality of your life determines on the information that you absorb. And that could be like mindless bullshit on TikTok. Like I feel like I don't actually use TikTok at all, but I know people spend a crazy amount of time just absorbing TikTok, random freaking things and stuff like that. And like I think about like kids, even my kids these days, like they're sitting there watching these things that aren't necessarily going to change their lives, but they're just doing it for repetition. It's our brains want these dopamine kicks. But I was trying to tell my kids, like, you know, and I'll send them podcasts and things to listen to, but they're just not absorbing it. They're not to that point to absorb it yet. I do believe that they will have that shift at a certain point in their lives. But I think it's early. It's important to expose people to things early, because I do believe that it's that seed that's being planted, you know, which I think is powerful in the long run.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. How old are your kids? I know you said you had one in college.
Yeah, my daughter is going to be 21 October 6th. So, and then I have a 17-year-old son who's now getting to the point, like he's going to be an entrepreneur. He's not a school student at all. He's doesn't get good grades. Like he's never been a kid that really like sits there and is focused on that. But I'm okay with that, because I was the exact same way. But he does have that drive of like wanting to do a lot of things. And then I have an 11-year-old who's about to turn 12, and he is, I feel like, you know, they're being exposed. Like they go to my summits where there's 1,000 people there. They're listening to, you know, these investors. They're in the car with me listening to podcasts. Like they're absorbing the stuff. But my daughter, who's off to college right now, like she's, you know, has $40,000 saved up already. She has, you know, she's going to school to be a CPA. Like, so she knows like, you know, kind of that position of how to continue to grow. So I know that what I've talked about is sticking with them. I wish she would want to get into real estate, but she decided not to. Which is totally fine. I think eventually she'll use that as, you know, to preserve wealth over time, especially if she's able to make some pretty good cash as a CPA, which CPAs are a necessity, as you probably know already. And yeah, man, so I'm always kind of dropping those seeds on a regular basis, you know, and I think it's important to do that. But they're seeing things on a different level.
Absolutely. And I think that's so special, because like you said, the seeds are being planted, and think about it, like they're getting what you didn't get. So they're going to be further ahead on like by default, right? Like look at what she has saved, and she's still in college. I mean, I was in college, I couldn't rub two pennies together, right? So it's a beautiful thing that she's getting that, and they're getting that exposure. I mean, I'm sure you would have loved to get that exposure at summits and different things like that, or even have awareness that this stuff is out there and is possible. But, you know, not only do they see you doing it day to day, but they also get that additional exposure, get to meet people. So even if they're not engaging or different things, like it's working. It's gonna come out eventually. It's getting into them, which is the important part. So that's amazing.
Yeah. Did your parents, did they always work like W-2 jobs, or do they do any type of entrepreneurship at all?
Yeah, they always did W-2 work. They always did W-2 work or, like contract work, but they always worked like traditional 9 to 5 jobs for my whole life and currently as well. What about you?
Yeah. My parents, my mom worked seasonal. So, like a lot of Hispanics, it was like, cannery work during, harvest season. My dad worked at Foster Farms, and he was one of the guys, that he worked in a biology lab. It was called Palm Experimental. It was in California. And he was one of the guys in the 80s and 90s that was pumping chickens full of antibiotics to get them to grow faster. So
Wow.
my dad was incredibly smart, like a super smart person, but the kind of smart where almost I'm gonna talk about this as a doctor right now, because if you've met any physicians at all, they have these like very bland personalities. I've only met a few doctors, and I've worked in healthcare for 17 years, that actually had like, expressive personalities. Most of them are just super studious. You know what I'm talking about, right, Sam? Like
Yes,
just
yes.
that kind of like no interpersonal skills at all. Like you go and you drop that person in a party, they're going to be like not even hanging out. They're not going to be dancing. They're not going to be doing any of that stuff. They're going to be in the back corner. Because that's how my dad was. But he did try. My dad retired like 5 times. He went and opened up a carpet cleaning business. That didn't work. And then I saw him go back to the W-2 job again, and because he retired and went back to work, and then he retired again, and then he became a real estate agent. Failed at that because he didn't have those personal skills. And then he went back to college and got his botany degree. I don't know why the hell he got a botany degree. Yeah. And then he ended up getting cancer and passing away. But like for me,
Oh,
that
I'm
was the
sorry.
catalyst to start to get into this real estate stuff and really go like full force. But yeah, my parents were opposite in a lot of ways. My mom was more of like the business oriented person. I feel like if my mom was running the household on the financial side, like, was managing my parents' money and all that stuff, we probably would have bought more homes and things. My parents probably would have, because they were my mom had the vision to do things all the time. Like her family had like little shops and little shoe stores and stuff like that, and they would always say like, you
Yeah.
should open up one up down there. And my mom would be like, let's do it. My dad would be like, no, it's too risky, it's too scary. And and they never did it. But I feel like, if there, it would be a different position if they did. But anyway, that's how I grew up, is like watching my dad open these businesses and close them, and then open them and close them. But it also gave me like this idea that anything that he wanted to do, he tried it. And if it didn't
Yeah.
work, like he just went back to what he did. So I think subconsciously in some weird way, and I haven't really talked about this ever, I might have like picked that up, from him, as far as like trying stuff and seeing if it works, and, seeing if it sticks. But I think it's helpful when you have a parent that does that, because it allows you to
Yeah.
kind of see outside of where most people traditionally are, which is the W-2 jobs, right?
Absolutely. And that's so cool that, you mentioned like just his personality and being risk averse, but I mean, he actually did take some risk. He tried different businesses and stuff. So I think it's amazing that he just the personality, the way you described him, that he even tried some of those things is amazing. Like even if they didn't work. And yeah, I think that says a lot. And yeah, I think is who knows what could have happened if he took your mom on some of her ideas. You never
I know.
know.
And I know if my dad was alive now, Sam, like my dad never got to see like this side of my success. He got to see like, I was working a W-2 job and, making 150, 200K a year, which is pretty awesome. Like that's freaking amazing. Especially where I live in the Central Valley. Like you make 150, 200,000, like you're doing pretty good in the Central Valley.
Yeah.
So he got to see that, but he didn't get to see like the, this next level success, the building a business, multiple different businesses and having them go well. And, he didn't get to see that stuff. But I know if he was around right now, he would definitely be working, in the business with me, or we'd have a family business to some degree. But, his death ultimately was the catalyst and the push for me to like fully, devote myself to real estate, or start to like really focus on it, because
Yeah.
I watched my dad hate his job for years, Sam. Like he would
Wow.
come home and just be like, this place is like eating me alive. And the reason why he did all that stuff, and again, this is a Hispanic culture, like it's not for him. It was for his family, like 100% that. Nothing even about him. Like my dad saved money all the time. And what's crazy about it, Sam, is when my dad was diagnosed with cancer in May of 2017, he started to he wanted to go buy a Corvette. Like his lifelong dreams that he never had. Like he was like, I want to go get a Corvette. Should I go buy a truck? Should I now he actually was like, my life's probably going to be ending soon. I have stage 4 cancer. I want to go get the things that I always wanted to get. And that right there was like an eye opener to me, like to realize like not only was he working for somebody that he didn't like, he didn't appreciate it, but that took his entire life. And now the way that he ultimately raised me, which was like save all your money, don't spend money on dumb stuff. The Dave Ramsey philosophy. In fact, that was the first book he ever gave me ever, was a Dave Ramsey book. Like buy everything in cash, don't put anything on credit. He had this different philosophy, when he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And I think ultimately that was the thing where I'm just like, man, I work at a company that I hate. I don't like going to work. I'm driving 2.5 hours each way to go to the Bay Area and back every day.
Wow.
I'm building something for somebody else. Like these companies are making millions of dollars off me and I'm making a couple $100,000, which is great. But in reality, like I'm making this company because it was me building it on the sales side, making this company, hundred or millions of dollars. We were doing like, 20 million a year with the company. And it was based off of sales, like stuff that I was bringing in, stuff that I was helping the company do. And ultimately, like that was what made me realize, like, shit, man, I can't keep doing this. Like I watched my dad go through that. Have you ever had anything similar to that in your life, Sam?
Yeah. I've felt that at most of the jobs that I've been at. The W-2 is good for what it's good for, but the some of the challenges can be the lack of appreciation, things of that nature, and it can be tough. And I've always been by nature a very risk averse person, just because that's just how I was raised. But I think my wife has helped me to break out of that and take on more risk, even though you don't know how things are going to work or how things are going to happen. And I think also investing in real estate, stocks, things different, those kind of things slowly over time help me to not be so risk averse, because at the end of the day, you just have one life to live, right? On this earth. Like you, obviously you take care of home, right? Whatever you got to do. But I think it's important to just try some stuff. Everything may not work, but the things that don't work can get you closer to that one thing that's going to blow up and change your life forever. So, I definitely can relate to a lot of that story. And, like, for example, I ask my dad sometimes, how was work? He's like, whatever, work is work. It is what it is. I came home, whatever. Like, I know what it's like to have parents who their jobs, it's just a means to an end, right? You're just doing it to take care of yourself and things like that. So, they didn't have a really opportunity to do some of the things they may have wanted to do in life. So I want to make sure myself and the future generations, like they're able to take some of those chances, and they're able to try some things in life and not have regrets of like, I should have done this. I should have went there. I should have tried this. Like, you might as well just try, whatever it is. And if it doesn't work, you do it better the next time or do something else. There's no downside to it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. And there's nothing wrong with W-2 like employment. I think there's just ways
Absolutely.
of leveling up the game. Hey everyone, if you are feeling stuck or not like you're making the progress you want in your midterm rental journey, I've got something that can change everything for you. Imagine being part of a community that's not only supportive, but filled with like-minded individuals who are driven to succeed, just like you. Whether you are just starting out, looking to take care of your business to another level, my community is designed to help you break through those barriers. We're currently opening up registration for new enrollees, so if you're serious about building a thriving midterm rental business, and you want to leverage my 10,000 hours of experience, this is your chance. Don't miss out on the opportunity to learn, grow, and connect with others in the same path. I hope to see you guys. The link is in the show notes, and let's build something incredible together. Let's get back to this episode. And this is something that I did. I did it unknowingly, but I started off at a job making $40K. Like that was my first position in 2003. As a sales rep or as a I don't remember what the job was at the time. I was like a delivery driver, and I ended up working my way up in the company. But what I did is I made 40,000, went to another company, made 49,000, went to another company, made 62,000, went to another company, made 79,000, went to another company, made 90,000. So I kept leveling up where I was at, because I knew that where I was at, the company was like, I tapped out there already. I was doing
Mhm.
all the things. But I feel like a lot of times people don't necessarily take those leaps because they get used to being in the same position. They get used to being around those same people. And I feel like one of the W-2 advantages that you have, if you get good at something, you start to look at these companies. How can I improve them? I stay 10 minutes later and I show up 10 minutes earlier. Like just doing that alone is going to put you up. You're going to be in the 10 percentile of like your company. Like people
Yep.
don't do that. They just clock in, they clock out, they jam out at 5 p.m. They're out before the clock even shows, before the clock even goes off. And I think just doing those things, like not only shows value in a lot of ways, but you're able to like work your way up into certain things. And
Yep.
for me, that was how I did it. And I always tell my kids that too, is like, you guys can get really good at something. You start to understand the business. You get around the owners of these companies. You start to be around the high level executives. What's important to them? Go find those things and be like, hey, I can actually improve margins by this. I see that we have, sales have decreased in the southern part of this, California or whatever, whatnot. Have you guys tried these 3 different tactics? And now those people are going to start paying attention to you. You might not even be in that position to even have that capability to talk about those things, but you're being around those higher level executive suites or managers, and you're starting to understand what's important to them. And you're seeing a change in that. And if you just bring that stuff to employees, like they're going to be like, or employers, they'll look at you different, man. I think a lot of times we just don't think about those kinds of things when we're younger. Like you could do a little bit and it's actually a lot.
Yeah, I like that mentality. I think that's a good way to get the most out of where you're at, for sure.
I totally agree. Well, I want to jump into something right now, Sam. I want to talk about a couple different things, especially when it comes to the Hispanic and the Black community in real estate, and just get your point of view on this. The Black community has faced systemic barriers in real estate, from redlining to discriminatory. We've read about lending practices or people's houses that are worth less when the neighbor across the street that was a white guy was what are those guys called that come appraisal. Did you read that story about that woman in Georgia that her house appraised less than? And you're starting to see kind of things like this popping up all over the place with the internet now. Have you navigated any of these challenges as a Black investor ever? Have you ever thought about anything like that?
Yeah. So fortunately, I haven't had to go through any of those kinds of experiences, but it's very real. It's crazy. Like I was reading yesterday and I came across a story of a John Hopkins professor and I think this one went viral a couple years ago. Basically, he lives in Baltimore and him and his wife were trying to get their house appraised so they could refinance, whatever the case is. And they had all their art, basically everything in the home to indicate that it's a Black family there. And it appraised for a certain amount. And when they took all that stuff out, it appraised for several $100,000 more.
It's wild, dude.
Very crazy. Very crazy. It's tough. It's tough. I wouldn't want to, I can't even imagine like what that felt like going through that experience. But I think the good thing is that there's light being shed on it. There's attention being drawn to it. But thankfully I haven't had to experience like any type of discrimination or anything like that, like within real estate, at least nothing that I was aware of. But I haven't had any bad experiences in that regard that were racial type of things.
Got you. Yeah, I've been reading a bunch about the appraisals that come back differently based off of an appraiser coming out and seeing the property and things of that nature, where the property is undervalued because there's Black or Hispanic folks that are living in the house. And I think it's just such a crazy it's just such a crazy thing to look at and be like, man, that's some crazy stuff for people to to do something like that. And I think those are like also barriers for other people once, investors or like younger people growing up that are Hispanic or Black. Like you're watching these things on TV and now you're thinking like, I'm not going to get involved in real estate because this is what's actually happening. I'm not saying everybody's doing that. I'm not saying that's everybody, right? But what do people remember the most? It's always the negative stories and those are usually what impacts people the most. It could be, a guy that owns, 100 doors and they talk about that, but then all of a sudden you get somebody that talks about their house being, assessed and the price was way different based off the color of their skin. And that's what holds on to a lot of people where they start to think like, why am I going to get involved in this? I'm not going to get the returns that I want, or, it's not in favor for people like me. And I think that's a pretty common, conversation, especially with people that are younger. Like I've talked to people and they've said that to me, like, real estate's not for me. Like I'm not gonna be able to do that. My parents told me I probably it's not a good idea, or it's not a good thing, or use a story like that. And it's just like, man, like there's more to this. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And here's what I'll say to that. The parents and relatives, friends, whatever, who are saying those things, they mean well, but at the end of the day, people need to be careful who they're taking advice from. Like I've spoken to people too, who are trying to run their ideas of something they want to do. Let's just say investing in real estate by somebody who hasn't done it. So you're taking information from somebody who has no experience doing what it is you're trying to do. Whereas you've seen people do it, but because your aunt or your parent said that, oh, it's not a good idea. What is that based off of? Is it based off of what they saw, what they heard? Is it based off of their experience? And if it's based off their experience, is there anything they could have done better? Or did they just quit when something went wrong or when something didn't go in their favor? So I think it's important for people to filter information properly and really investigate who is telling you this information and where is it coming from. If it's not coming from experience and if it's coming from just, oh, I heard, I saw, I would toss it in the garbage. Like they mean well. Thank you for your opinion, but don't let that stop you from what it is you're trying to do. And I hope that people can start to push past that, because that'll hold you back and you'll be living with regret if someone's saying X, Y, and Z is not a good idea, but they've never done it.
Yeah, I agree, man. I think it took me a long time to realize that too. Probably at least 30 something years where I started to like, people would tell me like, oh, don't do that. That's stupid. That's because I'm opposite of you. Like I love risk. Like I'm a big risk taker. My risk tolerance is high. I'm just like, I'll do it. I'll try it. I'm like one of those guys. But I would always have people tell me like, oh, that's not a smart move and you shouldn't do that. And that's dumb. Like who's going to want to rent a property for 30 days? It's a nurse or, whatever, something about that. And I would just be like, I would start to lean into that because I don't know. I'm just looking for some kind of somebody to support me to a certain degree. And, and you're right. Most people that haven't done what you wanted to do like, why are you going to listen to them? Why, what have they done or, are they 2 steps ahead of you? Have they done what you're talking about? And what gives them the position to be able to talk about, your goals and your dreams because they haven't done anything yet. I think that's a super strong thing, especially as, coming again, and I'm using this Hispanic portion here because Hispanic families will tell you everything. Like I can walk into a room and my family would be like, oh, you're fat. Like you look like you just gained weight. Like that's how open, in fact, Hispanic people call each other fatty. Like they'll be like, hey, fatty. It's like a term of endearment. You know what I mean? It's like crazy like that. So Hispanic families will literally just tell you like, if they think you're fat or something's wrong and, that's not a good idea. That's stupid. You're going to end up broke. And, you kind of grow up with that mentality. So I think it's like, you have to unlearn all these things. And then this is me talking about this. I had to unlearn a lot of the ways that I was taught things because I thought that's what normal was. You know what I mean? Because that's how my family and what our culture is, and you really got to unlearn a lot of things, especially when it comes to taking advice from people that might be your crazy uncle that doesn't know crap. You know what I mean? And is still living with grandma back at the house and he's like 50. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I agree with that. And, the unfortunate thing is that some people put their limiting beliefs on others, their fears on others, their lack of confidence on others, and they project a lot. And honestly, I feel like a lot of people don't even realize they're doing it. So it's important for you to, and anyone who's listening to just check that and really think about and ponder on that and not just take things at face value, because it'll just have you going in the wrong direction. Like before I got into real estate, I didn't tell anybody until after I closed. You want to know why? Because everybody would have said, why are you doing this? How could that? Everyone would have said all of those things because no one had ever done it. No one had ever done it in that way, buying in a place where you don't know anybody 1,000 miles away. No one had done it. And I heard it from people after the fact, right? But I don't care. I don't care because you wouldn't do it. You're not going to put money in my pocket. You're not going to pay my bills. So I don't care if someone has something to say after the fact. And, sometimes it's best to move in silence and come out after you've done what you said you were going to do. So as to not have people in your ear, right? Because I don't know if I would have persisted if I was hearing all that negativity before I decided to get on that journey. So sometimes it's, everyone who's listening, your people, how people might respond to certain things. So you don't need to share everything with everybody, right?
Yeah.
Share it after you've accomplished it, and then they'll look and be amazed.
Yeah, move in silence, and I agree to that. I mean, with me, like I tell my family everything. We've always talked about everything, especially when it was like goals. I'd go to my dad and be like, "What do you think about this? What's your thoughts on this?" And he'd be like, "I don't know, man. Like, that's a big risk. You don't know if people are going to stay there. You're going to be able to cover the mortgage if it, I'm like, they'll always give you the what if scenarios. I think parents do that. But you're right, man. It's like unless they've been there and done that, are you going to really want to make sure that you're taking advice from somebody that hasn't been there and done that? And you said something perfect. Like, your family, like, you already know, those out there listening to this right now, what your family is going to say if you're going to invest or you're going to start this business and stuff like that. So be super thoughtful on it. I got a question because we talked about like, you buying properties and, out of state and stuff. I feel like access to capital still remains a significant barrier for both Hispanic and Black investors. Have you had to get creative with any financing deals? And what advice would you give to people who are trying to raise capital or trying to find out, like how to buy a property?
Yeah. So I'll say it definitely is hard. For my first property, I put my student loans in forbearance. I was paying a lot of money so I could save up some money, and I borrowed for my retirement because it would have took me honestly years to come up with the money. Right. And
Yeah.
it was only like 20 grand or so. Right. So, I think that's very real. What I would suggest is considering collaborating with someone who is looking to do the same thing. Like if you have a friend or a family member who you trust and is trying to do the same things and is serious, perhaps on your first couple of deals, you combine your money together. That can help to shorten the time frame. So that's something to look into. If someone is maybe looking on a local side, you want to look into those different grants and programs and stuff. Obviously, you still have to afford the mortgage, but that's something else to look into. And then the third thing is like sometimes it's going to take you some time, right? Sometimes you're not going to be able to buy something in 12 months. Sometimes you might have to wait several years to get your money up and all those things. That's just the reality in some cases, right? But I would encourage people to think through some of those options. But it's tough. We're in a tough economy right now. And there's a lot of people who aren't doing that great, right? So it's a challenging time. But I would suggest people consider that. If you have a retirement plan, consider borrowing from it. See if that's something that you can do, that you can pay back, on a month-to-month basis, and that could help speed up that timeline for you. That's what I did. That's what helped me. So I would say turn over every stone and don't let the lack of capital stop you. It should push you to think of creative ways to generate the income, to get more money, save more money. It should push you to think outside of the box. And if you can do that, it'll definitely speed up that timeline and help you to reach that goal faster.
Yeah, I mean, not only that, Sam, but like you're in California in like literally arguably one of the most expensive cities in the world, which is Los Angeles, right? So,
Yep.
I mean, you can't even. I don't even know what the median price for a property would be in Los Angeles. Probably $1 million, I would assume, right,
About
Sam?
$1 million, I think. Yeah. For like a single family home, about $1 million.
Which is freaking wild. And so, I mean, that forced you already to start looking at, and it didn't necessarily force you because I think there's still deals that you can land here in California. You got to do some work, but like you now put yourself in a position where you're like, okay, I'm going to use my 20 grand that have saved up in my 401k plan. I think that's what you said, or in your, in whatever, program or whatever, wherever you stored your cash. It sounds like a 401k. Am I right on that?
Yeah. Part borrow from 401k and part what I saved from not paying student loans for a year.
Saved. Got you. So, I mean, that alone, with $30,000, that'll allow you to buy some property in the Midwest somewhere. And,
Yep.
And that's exactly what you did, right? So
Yep.
what was your thought process there? You're like, I can't buy anything in California. So I'm going to go to a place where, like, what was your first deal? Can you walk us through what that looked like?
Yeah. So that was definitely the thought process. I'm like, all right, well, I was desperate, to be honest with you. I was desperate because I knew that I wanted to make this happen. And I knew that it would be impossible for it to happen in California within a reasonable time frame. And I needed to get started now because, like I said, my retirement wasn't going to kick much based on what they project for me to make, right? So that was my mentality. I'm like, I need to figure out a way to do this. And so I started turning over every stone and thinking, how can I make this happen? And so I called the retirement like, hey, how do I access this money? They explained to me the options. And I'm like, okay, my student loan can go into forbearance. So I'm like, I need to do everything in my power to make this happen. And it forced me to think outside of the box. So that first deal was a single family home. It was 89,000. So I put 20% down plus closing costs. So it was probably in the lower
20 grand.
yeah, 20 grand or so with closing costs and stuff like that. And at the time, it probably cashed for like $300. Though it was renting at that time for 900. Right now, it's renting. I mean, we know what happened with rents over the last couple of years. So right now, it's renting for like 1,400, which is no. I wasn't just some genius. I couldn't have predicted that. The market just did some crazy stuff in the last couple of years across the country, as we know. But it's still going good. I mean, a lot of headaches, a lot of things I learned in that first experience, but that was the deal. And people will be surprised that $90,000 is not even a down payment over here. depending on what it is you're trying to buy, right? Like that might be like what 10% down, almost 10% down on a property. But how long would it take the average individual to save $90,000 if they
Lifetime.
are if they want to, or $100,000, right? Most people never get to save that much money. So, I just had to get in where I fit in, right? And it couldn't happen here, and it still can't. And there's many other reasons I wouldn't even want to do it here. But that was my journey. And I encourage people too who live in expensive places to consider investing out of state. Everybody can't up and move. I get it, right? You have obligations, you have work, you have family, children, all sorts of things. You can't necessarily move from whatever expensive place you might be living in. But if you want to invest, I encourage you to consider out of state investing, because it could be what helps you to bridge that gap and to gain some income over the long term.
And skills. I think that's what's most important, is that like once you learn how to do that, and I think this is where most people get stuck, is that they say, I'm going to buy something in Cincinnati. How am I going to take care of it out there? Well, guess what? You're forced to figure that shit out when you buy a property, and it's not as difficult as it seems. You can get a property manager, you can do it yourself. But can you give us some out-of-state investing tips that have been helpful for you? And were you freaked out when you're like, man, I'm buying a property that's like, I got to hop in a plane and do a whole thing? Like, what was your thought process there?
I wasn't afraid at all, because I got to a point where it's like, look, it's either this, or what's the alternatives? Staying with how things are now, doing what I'm doing now. Like, this might sound kind of crazy, but my mentality was, if the house collapsed with the tenants out of it, like let's say it was vacant, the house collapsed, hopefully I get an insurance payout and I move on, and I move on with my life. That was my mentality, because it's like, I need this. I want this to happen. Nobody in my family has done it in this way. So whatever happens, happens. I've done the best due diligence I can with what I know. If stuff happens, which it did, I'll just figure it out, right? That was my mentality. So the fear and all that stuff, it went away. And like you said, it forces you to figure things out. And the number one skill is delegation. It's hard to delegate, but I'm not about to be flying back and forth for stuff. You need to get things done through other people. Like, for example, I have a tenant moving in another property next Wednesday, and tomorrow I have somebody doing a little bit of landscaping, taking out poison ivy, doing a couple other things. And I just literally before this call, I confirmed somebody to do a deep clean. And how they're going to get in? There's a lockbox code. I have a Simply Safe system that I'll disarm when they get to the house. There's a camera in there so I can peek in and see what they're doing. There's a doorbell camera. Like, all that stuff is set up so I can have more peace of mind. And once a tenant moves in, I'm never checking that stuff again. Like, that's for them. They can log in, check it out, but it's in their hands, right? So delegation is the number one skill. There are headaches, right? But that's what you sign up for. That's just part of the business. So that would be my advice. And I say as well, people should make sure they understand the market, the jobs that are coming there, if there are jobs that are there, the major employers, companies that are coming there, if the city's investing in infrastructure and just different redevelopment plans and things of that nature. You want to understand those things. And of course, you want to make sure that you can actually make money with the type of property that you're trying to get as well.
Yeah, you're right, man. I think, again, a lot of people are just like, they're just scared of that. I hear so many people like, oh, I want to invest, but like, how am I going to take care of this in Florida? Like, I'm in California, or how am I going to do this? It just seems too far. And you're right. Like, you can't hop on a plane and freaking go out there and do every single little thing. And I think once you realize that, like, delegation is a legit thing. Yes, it costs money sometimes, but I feel like that ultimately is what gives you the skills that can allow you to scale to another degree. Because once you're going to get one under your belt, the second one's not harder. In fact, real estate's one of those things where the more you get, the easier it becomes, because now there's like SOPs or systems together. The properties already kind of start to function on their own. You know what screening to do. You know who to look for. You know what kind of clients are, or what kind of tenants are going to be bad. You know what kind of, like, so you start to like learn these things over time. And you're right. It's like, you got to force yourself to get in a situation like that where you're uncomfortable, because that's what creates growth ultimately, is that uncomfortable feeling.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, it really, really is. What is your plans now, Sam? Like, where are you? Because I know you got property in the is it Midwest?
Midwest, Dayton, Ohio.
Dayton, Ohio. So what's your what are you doing now? Like, what's your thought process with continuing to grow? Continuing to do stuff in the space.
Yeah, so I have a few properties out there right now. So right now I'm trying to stabilize things. So I've had a vacancy for a couple months, just figuring all those things out. So it'll be good to get a tenant in there. So I have one project coming up that I'm going to look into once this person's in next week is at another property. There is like a tree. There's big trees in the yard, and there's a tree that's literally hanging over the fence onto the sidewalk. I don't want to get sued, so I need to get like a, that's my next thing I'm thinking about, just getting that trimmed and taken care of. And then as far as growth, I do think I'll buy again in the somewhat near future, probably. Um, so yeah, I do definitely want to continue to grow. I have like a slow growth plan, honestly. If I can get some every couple of years, I'm cool with that. And I'm looking at it for long term stability, building equity, all those things. And so that's the path that I'm on. I definitely intend to continue investing in Dayton until there's no more deals and the numbers don't make sense. But as so long as they do, I'll continue to invest there. And I have the people there to help. And so I just want to keep this train rolling.
Do you invest in like flips and stuff, or is it mainly just like turnkey kind of things?
So I'm a buy and hold guy. I have such a respect for flippers, and I love seeing the before and afters, but
Yeah.
I don't have the stomach to deal with all the in between. It's just not me. I don't like having to deal with contractors and things like that. I barely like dealing with like people cutting grass, right? So I don't want to deal with people in that way.
Yeah.
It's just not my thing. And so I admire all the flippers and the rehabbers, and I love watching it, but I stay in my lane.
Yeah, man, I'm with you on that. I feel like I've had a couple. I've never done any flips before, but I've done some like deep projects, and the level of hand holding, and it's almost like you're having to navigate children around.
Yeah.
So I mean, if a contractor could just show up on time, like that's a good contractor. It's like the standards of these people. It's like it's crazy, bro. Because I've worked with so many of them, and they're all the freaking same except for like a couple. So what's crazy about investors is when they find a talented person, the contractor that shows up, like they don't want to share information with anybody else because they're like, I know this guy's going to show up. Like he's doing a good job. Like I want him to work for me, and I'm not going to give that information out. It's like they're like hoarding this like quality person. But most contractors are just, man, they don't show up on time. Things aren't going to be done the right way. I know I'm going to get some crap comments about this, but that's just been my story for 7-8 years on and doing this. Anytime I've had a project that I picked up that needs a lot of work, you just ultimately have these freaking contractors that are just lagging on things, and you got to, if you don't have a project manager to literally babysit them, it's like you got to pull teeth sometimes to do things. So I hear you, man. I'm with you on that when it comes to specific things like that. So what's your thoughts on the I know we're coming into a new election year. What's your thoughts on real estate? With the Trump campaign and versus a Harris campaign? Do you think that there's going to be any real estate? I just read a thing about, you might know a little bit more than me about this, but Harris wanted to do she was going to charge a tax. I think that was only for people that made over 100 million a year. Do you know that? Do you know that at all? Do you know
I haven't heard
that?
about that. I haven't heard about that.
Yeah, it's a tax, basically 25% tax on anybody who owns $100 million or more in real estate, which again, I'm like, the $100 million, that's a lot. You got to own a lot of real estate. But then I started reading comments of like what people wrote, and they're like, it starts there, and it's just going to be like a week with COVID, and you're going to see all these things change. And I'm just like, people always go to the worst scenario when it comes to politics and things of that nature. So like, what are you seeing right now? Or what's your thoughts on that? Or do you not even want to go down a political route?
Well, I'm ready for it to be over because it's nauseating, man, because each side, in particular with the media outlets, everything they're saying is to try to convince you who to vote for. None of it is logical. None of it is with reason. It's all to emotionally charge people to be on one side or the other. And that's the part that I don't like about it. It's like a game, really, right? Like they're just playing in our face, to be honest with you. So I'm ready for it to be over, actually. And as far as the impact on real estate, I mean, who knows? That remains to be seen. I know Kamala had a few things she wanted to propose for real estate and stuff like that, but who knows? Like it's hard to tell. But what I can say is I'm ready for it to be over. Like whoever wins, wins. It is what it is. And we can move on. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to. And hopefully whoever does win can have somewhat of a positive impact on real estate in some way that benefits a lot of people. Hopefully, you can only hope. but my hopes are not up. Let's just say that.
Yeah. I'm with you, man. I really feel, I was raised at, my dad was a independent, so he believed in both sides. I mean, I feel like, there were certain times my dad voted for, Bill Clinton, and then I saw him vote for Bush, and it's like, it wasn't always a one-sided thing. And I feel like politics back then were different than they are now. And I'm talking like 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, you started to see that. But there's just been this huge shift in you're right, man. It's almost like they're shoving a fire hose down your throat on one side or the other. And I think what's happening right now is that a lot of people are starting to wake up to see what's actually truly happening. Like who's in charge of our government. It's not the president. I don't feel like it is. I think it's actually big business. It's the Googles, the Facebooks, these big companies. They're actually the ones in charge. They're the ones donating hundreds of millions of dollars to these campaigns. And it's crazy to think about, when you look at that. So it's like right now I'm looking at like BlackRock just supported Trump, right? Which BlackRock owns a crap ton of real estate. And then you look at, all the support and donors that you get from the Harris side, and that is Facebook, it's tech, it's, all these folks on that specific side. It's the tech industry that's supporting that. But then you see, it's just so, you're right, man. It's just like this, and none of it seems real, dude. I feel like it's just a bunch of fluff talk that's not actually, we talk about fact checking all the time and stuff. And it's like, man, I'm just like, it's really disgusting to watch these two parties just like, cream each other and say like, this person's this and that. It's like, man, I don't remember any of that stuff at all, like growing up. And it sucks, man, because ultimately, like, we want best for the country, right? We don't want, I mean, I've been to other places and like, this is by far the best country in the world. Like you can literally do anything that you put your mind to here, which is why people come to this, this country. Because it literally is the best country in the world. And unfortunately, I feel like the political scene has just become like a circus in a lot of ways. And it's unfortunate for the people, because that's who ultimately at the end of the day is having to deal with the inadequacies that come from, government in a lot of ways. So it's a good time to be alive, but it's also kind of like a turbulent, weird time, man. It almost seems like a movie or something.
Yeah. That's why I'm ready for it to be over. So we have what, like 2 months, about 2 months left. So we'll see, man. We'll see how it all shakes out. But it's it'll be a great day the day after.
Yeah, well, we're both in California, so it'll end up being blue anyway. But
exactly, we already know.
Yeah, it's going to, like, the swing states. That's where it's going to matter.
Yep.
The California is going to be blue. All these states we know are already going to be blue. Whether I vote or not, it's still going to be blue.
Exactly.
And that's just the way it is. Okay, man. I gotta usually towards this time of my podcast, I usually ask some random questions. So, what would be? I mean, what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen? Do you go to any rental properties at all? Do you ever go to them? Like,
one of them I've very rarely, only once.
Got you. So you haven't seen any crazy stuff in any rental properties or anything like that?
No, not with my own eyes.
Got you. Okay, cool. Well, that's good to know, man, because I've been in some properties afterwards and they were just like, man, what the hell's going on? Do you have Airbnbs at all, Sam, or are they just short, or are they just long term?
Long term.
Got you. So they're all long term. Okay, cool. What kind of music are you into, Sam?
Yeah, so I like all types of music, man. I like R&B. I like a lot of old school stuff. I like gospel music. I like, what's that called? It's like it's like the music you might hear like a coffee shop or something. It's escaping.
Yeah, like coffee shop, kind of like indie rock kind of stuff.
Like I can't remember the genre, but yeah, I like a mix of things. It depends on the day, man. What about you?
So you're into everything. I like a lot of like 50s, 60s music. I'm into a lot of what you're just talking about, like coffee shop, like indie rock, small band kind of stuff. I like some rap. I don't like country at all. I don't know how people like that crap. Do you like country, Sam?
No.
Yeah, I've just never been into country at all. But like, I'm a big Beatles fan. Like, I love the Beatles. Like, I remember the first time I listened to the Beatles. But yeah, I played music. I was in bands. I played guitar, drums, bass, piano, all that stuff. So I'm super, super into music. And typically, like, after every episode, I usually play a song that like reminds me of a person, or like if we had an interview, like a song that I would like, or if a band that you said that you like, we'd bring that out. So yeah, Sam, where can folks find you at right now? Like, if they're going to go look for you on, Instagram, or do you have a website that people can connect with you on to talk about, your properties or your kind of your trajectory and getting into real estate? And maybe if they have any questions that they wanted to, present to you, where can they find you?
Yeah. So the best place to find me, I would say, is Instagram, Black Real Estate Dialogue. You can hit me up there. There's an email button you can send me an email to. And if you want to check out any content, you can check it on Instagram. You can check it on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all those things. Just type in Black Real Estate Dialogue and you'll be able to find me.
Yeah. And you have a podcast too, right, Sam?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I have a podcast as well.
Yeah. What's your podcast and like, what do you cover in your podcast?
Yeah, so my podcast, so I interview Black real estate investors, developers, et cetera. But I also cover like housing market news, different like real estate tips and stuff like that. So that's like the subject matter of the content. So I've been doing that for about 5 years. So around the time I started investing is around the time I started the podcast too.
So you did it right around the same time? Was that because like you wanted to be around other folks doing what you're like you wanted to do, or like what was
exactly
that for?
Like there was like a lack of representation because I was getting all this good information, but very few people looked like me. So I'm like, you know what? There has to be people out there who are doing this stuff. And so that was my mission, just to find these people and talk to them and see what they could share with the world for everybody's benefit. So that was the goal.
Is it hard for you to find people, Sam?
I would say I'm a lot more selective now.
Yeah.
Because I want to share good stories, like impactful stories and stories that people will have a higher likelihood of engaging with. I would say I was a lot more open or I was a lot less strict with who I spoke to before, but just in the wake of, all these scams and unethical people popping up, I'm very, very, very selective. So I actually do fewer interviews now, but I'm very selective with who I get on the platform because certain people I wouldn't interview again if I could do it again.
Yeah.
But that's in hindsight. Like I was very naive, like starting out. I was just like, oh yeah, everybody can come on, right? But it doesn't make sense strategically. And some stories just aren't interesting. They're not gonna get, some stories just are not that interesting. So I'm very, very much more selective this last year or two for sure.
Yeah. And there's really not a whole lot of like, specific, Black folks that are on these. I mean, what's that show? There's another show or crap. What's that company called? They're like a big, massive. I just saw that they had an event like 2 months ago and there was like 3,000 people there. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Oh, is it Black Enterprise?
Black Enterprise. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's like all these investors and like they have a program every quarter and there's like thousands of people going. So like I'm starting to see this shift in like culture and entrepreneurship now. And it's pretty cool, man, to watch. And I think it's important to really, highlight, your community. You're building a community, whether you want to believe it or not, like you are. And I think that's what's important. And one of the cool things that I like about what you're doing too is like you didn't have all the answers when you were starting off, but you still started a podcast. Mm-hmm. Like you wanted to be around folks that are building stuff that look just like you. And what an easier way to do that than to create a podcast where you talk about those things with the people that you want to, learn from. And that's not a lot of people are going to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, man.
Yeah, they're just really not. Well, I'm glad that you were able to pop in here, that we were able to talk about this stuff. I think there's some cool things. Definitely go check out Sam, you guys. He's got some, I really like your Instagram. I love what you're doing on there. Thank you. It's cool to see, man. And definitely check out your podcast too. Sam, it's been a pleasure having you here, man.
Thank you. Happy to come back anytime and talk about whatever. So thank you for having me and congrats to you for recently launching your own show as well.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Absolutely, man. I'll be continuing to tune in.
Cool. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it, brother.
Thank you for listening to the JV podcast. I'm Jesse Vasquez, your host. I appreciate you for listening. And if you could do me a huge solid, go like and subscribe to this. This helps us tremendously. And as always, thank you so much for listening and have a wonderful rest of your day.